Hello everyone, and welcome to 102 Hours. Tonight we step into the dense, humid jungle of Guyana where an eerie quiet hangs heavy in the air. Imagine the thick green canopy, the distant hum of insects, and the faint rustling of leaves as you trudge deeper, feeling an unsettling mix of curiosity and dread. You're entering Jonestown, not just a place, but a haunting chapter in the history of human belief and tragedy. A place where dreams of utopia turned into a nightmare, where thousands followed a man's promise of a better life, only to face a chilling, collective end. You probably won't survive this journey unshaken. The story of Jonestown is soaked in darkness, wrapped in mystery, and shadowed by horror. Yet, it's also a cautionary tale about power, faith, and the fragile nature of hope. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below with your location and local time. Let's see how far this story reaches tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the mid-1970s, Jonestown was more than just a dot on the map, it was the name whispered in fear and disbelief across the globe. Tucked away in the unforgiving wilderness of Guyana, South America, this settlement was home to the People's Temple Agricultural Project, a community led by a charismatic yet deeply troubled preacher named Jim Jones. The vision was utopian, an escape from the racial and social turmoil of the United States, a place where equality and peace would reign. But behind the hopeful slogans and the communal spirit, something far darker was festering. When you think of cults, you might picture isolated groups chanting in shadows or fringe believers on the outskirts of society. Jonestown, however, was different. It was a fully functioning community of nearly 1,000 people, including families, children, and elderly members. The community lived under Jones's strict rule, cut off from the outside world by jungle and paranoia. Many outsiders never fully understood what life inside Jonestown was like. Historians still argue whether Jonestown was primarily a tragedy of misguided idealism or a premeditated act of terror orchestrated by Jones. A quirky tidbit: Jim Jones was known for his penchant for dramatic public displays, such as baptizing hundreds at once in tanks filled with water, or staging political rallies where followers declared their absolute loyalty with slogans and hand gestures reminiscent of a cultish salute. Yet, these acts masked a much grimmer reality inside the camp's perimeter. You might be wondering how a community built on promises of freedom could spiral into something so suffocating. It's a story of belief, manipulation, and the dangerous extremes of idealism when wielded by one person with unchecked power. The seeds of disaster were planted long before the fateful day the world would come to know as the Jonestown Massacre. As you settle deeper into this narrative, prepare to confront unsettling truths about faith, control, and the human psyche. Keep your senses alert, the jungle is silent, but Jonestown's echoes scream through history. You meet Jim Jones first as a man who seems larger than life, magnetic, fiery, and oddly comforting all at once. It's 1950s Indianapolis, and Jones is preaching to a small congregation, his voice rising and falling like a tide, pulling people in with a mixture of charisma and urgency. His message is simple yet radical: equality for all, an end to racism, and a society where everyone belongs. To many, he's a prophet, a champion for the disenfranchised, especially in an America still riddled with segregation and injustice. But here's the thing: charm can be a mask. Beneath Jones's stirring sermons lies a mind wrestling with paranoia and megalomania. As his following grows, so too does his control, and his tendency to blur the line between spiritual leader and absolute ruler. You might imagine a preacher who preaches love but demands obedience, a contradiction that would become his defining trait. Jones's early ministry was notable for integrating races at a time when it was far from the norm. This drew many African American followers who found in him a voice against oppression. Yet, some critics whispered that his vision was not just about justice but about building an empire where dissent was crushed. Historians still argue whether Jones genuinely believed in his utopian ideals or if his need for control was always the driving force. A quirky detail you might not expect: Jones was fascinated by technology and often used audiovisual equipment to enhance his sermons. Think smoke machines, loudspeakers blasting rock music, and dramatic lighting effects. It was part showmanship, part psychological manipulation, designed to hypnotize his audience into submission. As you follow Jones from small-town preacher to cult leader, you see how his rhetoric shifted. Initially, he spoke of salvation and community, but increasingly, paranoia seeped in. He warned of external enemies, the government, the media, capitalist pigs, plotting against his flock. This siege mentality fed the isolation and fear that would later trap his followers in the jungle. You can almost feel the tension growing. Jones's transformation from charismatic preacher to authoritarian dictator wasn't overnight but a gradual descent fueled by his growing distrust and hunger for power. His followers, meanwhile, were caught in a whirlwind of hope, fear, and devotion. So, as you listen, ask yourself, what makes someone follow a leader like Jones? Is it desperation? Blind faith? Or something darker? The answers are tangled in the complex web of human psychology and the irresistible pull of belonging. You start to notice the early warning signs, subtle, almost invisible if you're not looking closely. The People's Temple, once a place of hope and inclusion, begins to reveal cracks in its shiny exterior. Members whisper about Jones's growing temper and the paranoia that seems to cloud his judgment. You hear about white nights, those sudden, bizarre emergency drills where followers rehearse mass suicide or armed defense, just in case enemies come knocking. It's like living on a knife's edge, where loyalty is tested with increasingly cruel demands. Some followers start disappearing, their absence explained away as voluntary departures or re-education, but the truth is murkier. Fear tightens its grip as Jones's rhetoric becomes more ominous, warning that betrayal means death or worse. Dissent isn't tolerated. You learn that those who question Jones risk public humiliation or being sent away to remote locations under suspicious circumstances. You get the unsettling feeling that the utopia promised is turning into a prison. Historians still argue whether Jones's paranoia was a genuine response to real threats or a strategic tool to tighten control. After all, the US government was increasingly suspicious, and some media outlets reported strange happenings at the temple. Yet many believe Jones manufactured much of the fear to keep his followers dependent and obedient. A quirky, lesser-known fact, Jones reportedly held death drills so frequently that some members became desensitized, treating the rehearsals like grim theater. One follower recalled how the drills involved fake cyanide capsules and scripted speeches about martyrdom. This dark routine blurred reality and performance, tightening the cult's psychological chains. You can almost feel the claustrophobia in the air, families torn between love for their leader and growing unease. The jungle outside feels less like a sanctuary and more like a cage, as surveillance increases and outside contact is strictly limited. Letters to friends and family are censored, visitors are rare and heavily monitored. The People's Temple is no longer just a church, it's a fortress built on fear and silence. As you piece together these early signs, it's clear the tragedy was seeded long before that final, horrifying day. The Jonestown Massacre wasn't an outburst but the tragic crescendo of years of manipulation, fear, and isolation. And yet, some still clung to hope, unwilling or unable to see the darkness closing in. You watch as the People's Temple begins its bold relocation to the wilds of Guyana, a move cloaked in promises of freedom and safety. The reasoning sounds compelling: escape the prying eyes of government agencies, the hostile media, and the growing backlash in the United States. Jim Jones paints Jonestown as a paradise where the community can live in harmony, self-sufficient and safe from capitalist corruption. For his followers, this is the ultimate chance to build the utopia they've been promised. But the journey itself is surreal, a mass migration into the unknown, with families and children boarding planes for a remote jungle that few outside had even heard of. The site is a dense, mosquito-infested patch of land, hot and unforgiving, far from the comfort of their California homes. It's easy to imagine the conflicting feelings among the members, excitement tinged with fear, hope mingled with doubt. The compound is quickly built, and the temple's ideals are transplanted into this new, wild environment. Life in Jonestown begins with idealistic fervor, communal work, shared meals, and long meetings reinforcing loyalty to Jones and the cause. Yet, the physical isolation is stark. The compound is surrounded by thick forest, making escape physically and psychologically difficult. The nearest town is hours away, and communication with the outside world is limited to censored letters and rare radio calls. The seclusion is intentional, part of Jones's growing control strategy. Historians still debate whether the relocation was an act of desperation or a calculated step by Jones to tighten his grip. Some argue he felt genuine pressure from U.S. authorities and sought refuge, while others say it was a pre-planned move to isolate followers and prepare for a final showdown. Either way, the move to Guyana marks a turning point, a crossing into a realm where the usual rules no longer apply. Here's a quirky tidbit: Jones insisted on renaming parts of the compound with grandiose names: Horizon Village for the living quarters, the White Knights Pavilion for the gathering hall, turning a makeshift settlement into a stage for his grand narrative. It's as if the names were talismans, attempting to mask the creeping despair with a veneer of hope. As you imagine this exodus, think about what it means to leave everything familiar behind on the faith of one man's vision. The seeds of tragedy are planted in this physical and psychological exile. The community's fate is no longer tied to a city street or a church basement but to the wild, untamed jungle, and to the will of the man who leads them there. You find yourself waking up in the sweltering heat of the Guyanese jungle, surrounded by the thick, heavy air that clings to your skin like a damp blanket. Life in Jonestown is far from the utopia promised. It's a relentless grind of exhausting labor, strict schedules, and constant surveillance. The community works from dawn till dusk, tending crops, repairing buildings, and attending endless political and loyalty meetings. The air is thick not only with humidity but with tension, as every glance is weighed for loyalty and every word measured for dissent. Jones's control seeps into every corner of life. You notice that privacy is a luxury no one can afford, living quarters are cramped, and personal space is almost non-existent. Family units are often split up for re-education, leaving children and parents separated. Meals are communal and strictly rationed, and food scarcity becomes a recurring concern, though Jones insists it's all part of building a strong, self-reliant community. The jungle itself is unforgiving, diseases like malaria are rampant, and medical supplies are limited. You begin to feel the psychological weight pressing down on the community. Jones's presence is omnipresent, whether through loudspeakers broadcasting his speeches or the constant gaze of his inner circle enforcing his will. Surveillance cameras, informants, and public punishments ensure that fear remains a powerful tool. The phrase "suicide is not the answer" is twisted into death before betrayal, embedding a dangerous ideology into the group's psyche. Historians still argue whether Jonestown was primarily a coercive prison or if some members genuinely embraced the communal hardship as a form of revolutionary sacrifice. The answer may lie somewhere in between, a tragic blend of hope and control. A quirky, almost surreal tidbit: Jones once staged a mock trial where members were forced to confess imaginary crimes under intense pressure, only to be publicly humiliated and reassigned to menial tasks. These psychological games were meant to break spirits and reinforce loyalty, blurring the line between justice and torment. As you walk through the compound, the sounds of the jungle seem drowned out by the low murmur of rehearsed chants and Jones's fiery rhetoric echoing over loudspeakers. The illusion of a perfect society crumbles with each passing day, replaced by an ever-tightening grip of fear and obedience. The people of Jonestown are trapped, physically by the jungle, mentally by Jones's will. You slip quietly through the shadows of Jonestown, where the surface calm belies a sinister undercurrent. Behind the communal gatherings and choreographed smiles, you sense an atmosphere thick with surveillance and suspicion. Jones's eyes and ears seem everywhere: trusted lieutenants, hidden microphones, and informants who report even the smallest sign of dissent. This paranoia isn't just paranoia, it's a calculated tool to maintain absolute control over the minds and actions of every resident. Inside the compound's darker corners, you encounter forced confessions and public punishments that feel more like theater than justice. Members are pressured to reveal sins or betrayals, real or imagined, in humiliating gatherings that shred their dignity and reinforce loyalty. The cult's infamous White Nights become more frequent, nighttime drills where Jones simulates attacks or mass suicide to test loyalty and readiness. The psychological toll is immense, fear and confusion blend until it becomes impossible to distinguish reality from ritual. Historians still argue whether these manipulations were primarily a method of survival for Jones or deliberate psychological warfare. Some suggest Jones genuinely feared external forces, while others believe he engineered a climate of terror to keep his followers from escaping or revolting. Here's a quirky and chilling tidbit: Jones occasionally staged mock executions during meetings, forcing members to witness symbolic deaths as a grim reminder of the consequences of disobedience. These staged events blurred the line between performance and reality, deepening the cult's grip on its members. As you navigate this tense environment, you feel how trust erodes and suspicion spreads like wildfire. Friends watch each other nervously, families are torn apart by accusations, and loyalty becomes a currency more valuable than food or water. The jungle itself seems to close in, a silent witness to the unraveling of minds and spirits. Remember that eerie clue from earlier, the White Nights drills? They are no longer just practice but a terrifying prelude to the final act. Inside Jonestown, the walls close tighter every day, trapping not just bodies but souls. The air inside Jonestown grows heavy with unease as whispers of doubt and rebellion begin to circulate. You notice how even the most devoted followers start to falter, their eyes flickering with hesitation during Jones's sermons. Some begin to question the increasingly erratic behavior of their leader, the endless paranoia, and the harsh punishments for minor infractions. Quiet conversations behind closed doors speak of escape, of rescue, or simply of a life beyond the jungle's suffocating grasp. But Jones is swift to quell any dissent. He doubles down on his rhetoric of loyalty and sacrifice, painting outsiders as enemies intent on destruction. The line between genuine concern and forced compliance blurs, as neighbors turn against neighbors under the pressure to prove unwavering allegiance. You can almost feel the paranoia spreading like a contagion, infecting every corner of the community. Historians still argue whether this growing dissent could have been an opportunity for intervention or if the cult's insularity made escape impossible. Some former members later suggested that small acts of rebellion were crushed before they could gain momentum, a chilling reminder of the tight control Jones wielded. A quirky, unsettling detail: Jones reportedly staged elaborate loyalty tests, where followers were forced to publicly confess their doubts or betray comrades to prove their fidelity. These tests created an atmosphere where trust was nearly impossible, and fear ruled over friendship. As you watch this unraveling, it's clear that the facade of harmony is cracking. The very people who built Jonestown begin to see it as a prison. And yet, leaving isn't as simple as walking away. The compound's isolation, combined with psychological and physical threats, creates a cage of fear and dependency. The tension is palpable, a powder keg waiting to explode. The final hours draw near, but the signs are still subtle to most. You're witnessing a community on the edge, where hope battles despair and obedience struggles with rebellion. The tragedy isn't inevitable yet, but it's looming ever closer. You feel the atmosphere shift the moment Congressman Leo Ryan arrives, a rare outsider stepping into the heart of Jonestown, eyes wide open and questions ready. His visit is charged with tension from the start. Ryan's mission is simple yet dangerous: investigate reports of abuse and coercion within the People's Temple. For many in the compound, Ryan represents a glimmer of hope, an opportunity to expose the truth. For Jones and his loyalists, he is a threat, an intruder whose presence sparks suspicion and panic. The arrival of Ryan's delegation is met with a mix of curiosity and fear. You watch as Jones's carefully constructed world begins to unravel under the scrutiny of an outsider. Meetings become tense, smiles forced, and eyes dart nervously. Ryan interviews residents in secret, uncovering stories of fear and control that confirm the worst suspicions. You sense the pressure mounting on Jones, who tightens his grip, knowing his facade is cracking. Historians still argue whether Ryan's visit accelerated the disaster or offered the only chance to prevent it. Some believe his presence exposed the cult's darkest secrets, while others argue it provoked a desperate, violent response from Jones. A quirky, little-known detail, Jones tried to distract Ryan by staging a performance of revolutionary songs and patriotic gestures, an odd mix that felt more like a bizarre political rally than a community event. It was a desperate attempt to maintain control and sway the impressionable outsider. As you follow the tense interactions, you can almost hear the ticking clock. Ryan's investigation is a catalyst, a spark that ignites fear and paranoia within Jonestown's walls. The community braces for what comes next, but no one can fully grasp the horror about to unfold. The tension is suffocating, like the jungle heat pressing in around you. The calm before the storm is shattered, and the final act of this tragedy is about to begin. You witness the explosion of chaos as Congressman Leo Ryan's visit spirals into violence. What began as a tense investigation ends in a terrifying ambush at the nearby airstrip where Ryan and several defectors attempt to leave Jonestown. Shots ring out, shattering the uneasy calm like thunder crashing through the jungle canopy. Ryan, along with 4 others, falls to the gunfire, an act of brutal desperation that sends shockwaves far beyond the compound. The attack is swift and savage, carried out by armed temple members who see the defection as betrayal. You can almost hear the panic in the screams, the sharp bark of gunfire, and the hurried scramble as survivors flee in terror. The attack at the airstrip isn't just a moment of violence, it's a point of no return, a grim signal that the tragedy inside Jonestown is accelerating toward its devastating climax. Historians still argue whether Jones ordered the attack directly or if it was an act of rogue followers. Some suggest it was a calculated decision to prevent exposure, while others believe it stemmed from frenzied panic and loss of control. Either way, the bloodshed marks the last chance for outside intervention. A lesser-known, chilling detail, one of the survivors of the ambush later recalled how Jones calmly told his followers that the attack was necessary, framing it as an act of defense against imperialist aggression. The rhetoric turned murder into martyrdom in a twisted act of propaganda. As you feel the chaos settling, the dread deepens. The community faces an impossible crossroads, fear and hopelessness now govern every breath. The jungle, once a backdrop, becomes a tomb for nearly 1,000 souls. And as the sun sets on that fateful day, you realize the darkest chapter of Jonestown's story is only beginning. You step into the heart of darkness as the order is given, the chilling command that seals the fate of Jonestown. Death before betrayal, Jim Jones declares, his voice echoing through the compound's loudspeakers, casting a shadow heavier than the jungle's humidity. The mass suicide begins, a grim ritual blending coercion and desperation, where loyalty is twisted into the ultimate sacrifice. You witness families gathered, clutching cyanide-laced punch as Jones watches over them, a disturbing mix of preacher, dictator, and broken man. The phrase drinking the Kool-Aid becomes a haunting symbol of blind obedience, though the reality is more complex and terrifying than the simple expression suggests. Children, adults, elders, thousands engulfed in a shared, tragic fate. Historians still argue whether every death was truly voluntary or if some were forced, shot, or coerced into compliance. The lines blur in the chaos, testimonies conflict, and the jungle swallows many secrets. What's undeniable is the profound human tragedy unfolding amid the thick greenery. A haunting detail, Jones himself survived the initial poisonings, only to reportedly take his own life afterward, his death shrouded in mystery and conflicting accounts. His last moments remain one of the many puzzles in Jonestown's dark history. You feel the weight of despair as the community succumbs, their dreams turn to dust. The jungle absorbs the silence, the screams stifled by the canopy overhead. It's a horrifying end to a story fueled by hope and crushed by control. Remember those White Nights drills? They were grim rehearsals for this very moment, practice for a mass exit from life itself. And now, that final, devastating act is reality. You hear the phrase everywhere, drink the Kool-Aid, but the truth behind it is far more harrowing than the casual expression suggests. It wasn't actually Kool-Aid but a poisonous concoction of flavor aid mixed with cyanide and sedatives that sealed the fate of nearly 1,000 people. This grim beverage became the cruel symbol of Jonestown's mass suicide, forever etched into popular culture as shorthand for blind obedience or deadly cult behavior. Yet, the phrase is misleading in its simplicity. Not everyone willingly drank the fatal mixture, some were forced, others injected, and children were given no choice at all. The reality behind the myth reveals a complex web of coercion, fear, and control, far from the neat metaphor the phrase implies. You sense how language can sometimes dilute tragedy, turning horror into cliché. Historians still argue about the origins of the phrase and how it came to dominate the narrative. Some survivors and researchers insist that using Kool-Aid trivializes the event and overlooks the depth of manipulation and violence involved. The phrase's evolution tells us as much about society's need to simplify trauma as about Jonestown itself. A quirky tidbit, Flavor Aid, the actual drink used, was a less popular competitor to Kool-Aid, yet it inherited the infamous nickname through widespread media misreporting. This mix-up remains a small but telling example of how misinformation can shape collective memory. You realize that the phrase "drink the Kool-Aid" masks a dark reality, one where choice was a lie, and survival was a nightmare. The simple words fail to capture the despair, fear, and confusion swirling through that jungle clearing. So, next time you hear the phrase, remember the human lives behind it, thousands trapped in a tragic moment where faith, fear, and power collided with deadly consequences. You hear desperate whispers of escape, flickers of hope piercing the dense fog of despair. Some Jonestown residents, fueled by a mix of fear and courage, attempt to flee the compound during those final, chaotic hours. Their stories are heart-wrenching, frantic runs through thick jungle underbrush, desperate hiding spots, and near misses with armed guards. The jungle, once a barrier, becomes both refuge and prison. But freedom is elusive. Many are caught, dragged back by the ruthless enforcers of Jones's will or succumb to the unforgiving wilderness. The thick foliage offers no true sanctuary from the terror. You can almost feel the pounding heartbeats of those running for their lives, the sharp snap of branches underfoot, the desperate gasps for breath blending with distant screams. Historians still debate how many actually escaped and survived versus those who were recaptured or lost. Survivor accounts vary widely, clouded by trauma and confusion. What's clear is that escape was an act of profound bravery, a testament to the human spirit fighting against overwhelming odds. A chilling, lesser-known detail, some escapees recounted hearing Jones's voice booming over loudspeakers, pleading for loyalty while threatening immediate death for runaways. This psychological warfare added a layer of terror that made fleeing even more perilous. You realize how the physical jungle mirrors the psychological one, dense, confusing, and filled with danger at every turn. The few who managed to break free became crucial witnesses, their testimonies shedding light on the horror and helping the world understand the full scope of the tragedy. As you imagine the frantic escapes, you see the raw human desperation struggling against the dark tide closing in on Jonestown. It's a haunting reminder of resilience amidst unimaginable fear. You arrive in the aftermath, stepping into a scene both surreal and devastating. Authorities, rescue workers, and journalists converge on the remote Jonestown compound, confronted by a haunting tableau of death and despair. The jungle, once alive with the buzz of insects and whispered prayers, is now eerily silent except for the rustle of leaves and distant calls of birds. Bodies lie where they fell, families together in death, some clutching hands, others frozen mid-motion in the final moments of their tragic choice. The scale of the massacre is overwhelming, nearly 1,000 lives extinguished in a single, nightmarish event. You witness the grim task of recovery, the meticulous cataloging of victims, and the somber faces of those left to piece together the puzzle of what happened. The cleanup is as much psychological as physical. Survivors and rescuers alike grapple with trauma, the horror etched into their memories. The government faces criticism for its delayed response and questions about oversight. The world watches in disbelief, struggling to comprehend how such a disaster could unfold in modern times. Historians still argue about the role of external agencies and whether more could have been done to prevent the catastrophe. The legacy of Jonestown forces a reckoning with questions of intervention, cult dynamics, and individual responsibility. A haunting detail: investigators found secret tunnels and hidden rooms in Jonestown, suggesting that Jones and his inner circle anticipated a prolonged siege or had plans for escape that never materialized. These hidden spaces add layers to the mystery and tragedy, hinting at a more complex final chapter. As you take in the aftermath, you feel the weight of loss but also the spark of resilience in those who survived and vowed to tell the story. Jonestown's shadow stretches long, a reminder of the fragility of hope when manipulated by power and fear. You feel the long shadow Jonestown cast over the decades, shaping how the world views cults, manipulation, and the limits of faith. The massacre becomes a grim symbol, etched into the collective consciousness as the ultimate warning against blind devotion and unchecked power. Survivors' stories, documentaries, and endless analyses keep the memory alive, forcing society to confront uncomfortable questions about control and vulnerability. Jonestown sparks reforms in how authorities monitor cults and religious groups, fueling debates about freedom of belief versus protection from harm. You sense a growing awareness of mental health issues, trauma, and the subtle ways coercion can twist idealism into tragedy. Yet, the fascination with Jonestown also risks reducing it to sensational headlines, overshadowing the human complexity behind the headlines. Historians still argue whether Jonestown should be seen primarily as a cult tragedy, a political disaster, or a psychological case study. The answers vary, reflecting the tangled web of causes and consequences that defined the event. A quirky, unexpected tidbit: Jonestown inspired countless works of art, from novels and films to music and theater, each interpreting the story through different lenses, some respectful, others controversial, highlighting how the massacre continues to resonate culturally. As you reflect on Jonestown's legacy, you realize it's more than just a cautionary tale. It's a mirror held up to society, revealing the dangers of extremism, the power of hope, and the enduring quest for belonging. The story lives on, challenging us to remember, to understand, and to prevent such tragedies from ever happening again. You linger on the unresolved questions and lingering mysteries that still surround Jonestown's final hours, where truth and speculation intertwine like the jungle vines choking the compound. Despite extensive investigations, many details remain clouded: conflicting eyewitness accounts, inconsistent official reports, and the deep trauma of survivors obscure the full picture. What really happened in those last desperate moments? Were all deaths voluntary, or was violence more widespread than acknowledged? One of the enduring scholarly debates centers on Jim Jones's true intentions. Was he a deranged cult leader driven by paranoia, or did he orchestrate a calculated mass murder-suicide? Did he believe in the utopia he preached, or was it merely a facade for his need to control? Historians still argue whether Jonestown was primarily a failed communal experiment or a premeditated act of destruction. A quirky, lesser-known detail: some researchers have explored the role of mind-altering drugs in Jonestown's final tragedy, suggesting that substances administered by Jones and his inner circle may have impaired judgment or coerced compliance, adding another layer of complexity to the narrative. You also consider the psychological aftermath. The survivors who escaped carry scars both visible and invisible, grappling with survivors' guilt and the haunting memories of friends and family lost. Their stories fuel ongoing investigations, documentaries, and academic studies aiming to untangle the web of cause and effect. As you conclude this journey, you realize Jonestown is not just a closed chapter of history but an ongoing conversation about faith, power, and human vulnerability. The mysteries it holds challenge us to question, to learn, and to remain vigilant against the dark potentials within idealism gone wrong. The jungle has long reclaimed the land, but the echoes of Jonestown still whisper, reminding us that some stories refuse to be forgotten. The final moments of our journey now slow as you drift away from the jungle's shadow and the haunting echoes of Jonestown's tragedy. The intense heat, the tight-knit fears, and the desperate loyalty give way to soft whispers of calm and reflection. Breathe deeply, letting the thick air clear as memories fade gently into quiet understanding. Though the story is dark, remember the resilience of those who survived, the courage of those who questioned, and the lessons hard-learned by a world forever changed. The jungle may have swallowed their voices, but their stories linger, fragile, persistent, and a reminder of our shared humanity. Let this be a moment to hold compassion close, to honor lives lost without judgment, and to carry forward the hope that from tragedy, awareness and healing can grow. The journey through Jonestown's depths has been heavy, but now, soft light breaks through the leaves, offering peace. Now, as you rest, let the night air cool your skin and the distant hums soothe your mind. Let your thoughts drift gently away from fear toward quiet hope.